January 2026. Iran's economy is collapsing, and truckers who once kept the country moving have brought its heart to a standstill, blocking highways, ports, even Tehran itself. This uprising isn't just about empty pockets. It's a direct blow to Khamenei's power. What triggered thousands to risk everything? And could this paralyze a regime once thought untouchable? Inflation in Iran soared past 40% in 2025, gutting the value of the rial and sending prices for fuel, bread, and medicine out of reach for millions. With the currency losing 80% of its value in just a few months, daily life became survival. Truckers, once the lifeblood of Iran's trade, watched their earnings evaporate as freight rates stagnated and fuel costs surged. By the end of December, strikes and protests had swept across 17 provinces, drawing in not only truck drivers but also merchants, students, and oil workers. On January 1st, Tehran's fruit and vegetable markets shut their doors. 3 days later, the Grand Bazaar, long seen as the pulse of the capital's economy, fell silent, its merchants joining the call for action. In smaller towns like Saman and Sangzar, shopkeepers pulled down their shutters in solidarity, amplifying the sense of paralysis. Unrest was not limited to city centers. Highways linking major ports and industrial hubs saw traffic grind to a halt. In Bandar Abbas, the country's principal port, roads clogged with parked trucks as drivers refused to move cargo. By January 4th, strikes had reached more than 20 cities and towns, leaving supermarket shelves in Tehran empty and petrol stations dry. With each passing day, the cost of inaction grew heavier, both for families facing shortages and for a regime suddenly unable to guarantee the flow of goods. The economic crisis had become a national emergency, one that made the blockades and mass protests seem not just possible, but inevitable. January 11th brought Shiraz to a standstill. At dawn, a line of trucks stretched across the main southern highway, engines silent. Drivers stood beside their vehicles, arms folded, refusing to budge. Among them was Ali, a father of two who had hauled freight between Bandar Abbas and Shiraz for over a decade. His truck, painted with faded slogans from earlier strikes, now served as a barricade. When police approached, Ali and the others didn't shout or wave signs. Instead, they locked arms and simply turned their backs, a silent answer to threats and loudspeakers. The tactic spread quickly. Drivers called it engine off. By midday, Shiraz's logistics arteries were clogged. Produce rotted in trailers under the winter sun. Small shopkeepers gathered at the roadside, some holding banners that read, "Javid Shah," "Long live the Shah," while others chanted for bread and justice. News of the Shiraz blockade traveled fast, carried by word of mouth, and grainy phone videos that slipped past the censors. Solidarity grew as students and merchants joined the crowd, turning the blockade into a rallying point for the city. For Ali, the risk was clear: loss of income, arrest, even violence. But as the day wore on, the trucks remained parked and the city's pulse slowed to a crawl. The crisis had a human face now, and its name was Ali. Isfahan's ring roads fell silent on January 12. Trucks stood abandoned, engines off, blocking every lane. Police demanded drivers clear the way. The answer was defiance. When security forces opened fire, 2 truckers were shot dead. News of the bloodshed spread instantly, even as internet blackouts tried to choke the story. By sunset, 16 deaths were reported nationwide. Haryana's casualty lists grew longer, but the names behind the numbers has rarely surfaced. One did: Sahar, a young woman caught in the crossfire as she tried to deliver food to striking drivers. Her death became a rallying cry, her name chanted from Isfahan to Mashhad. In Tehran, the regime's grip slipped further. The city's freight arteries, once pulsing with the movement of goods, were deserted. The capital's ring roads, usually thick with container trucks and tankers, were emptied overnight. No convoys entered from the south. Petrol stations ran dry. Supermarkets rationed what little remained. For the first time in decades, Tehran was cut off from the rest of the country. Its lifelines severed, not by war or sanctions, but by its own people. The protests had crossed a line. What began as a fight for survival now threatened the regime's very existence. Bandar Abbas, once the country's busiest port, now stands idle. Rows of shipping containers sit untouched, cranes frozen above them. The flow of goods from the Persian Gulf into Iran has slowed to a trickle. Mohammed, a shipping agent who has worked these docks for 15 years, describes a silence he has never witnessed before. He checks his phone for updates, but the only messages are from colleagues asking if any ships have been cleared to unload. None have. International trade partners are feeling the shock. China, Iran's largest customer, has cut its imports by nearly a quarter since the strikes began. The ripple reaches far beyond Iran's borders. Oil shipments, already hampered by sanctions and shadowy transfers, now face physical barriers at home. Tankers wait offshore, losing value by the day as delivery times stretch from weeks to months. For the Revolutionary Guard, which relies on port revenues and smuggling fees, the losses are mounting. Analysts estimate that more than 3/4 of Iran's imports are stalled, either at sea or in warehouses. Each day the blockade continues. The financial pressure grows, not just for the regime, but for trading partners caught in the crossfire. Right now, Iranian roads stand silent, yet the world can hear the demand for change. As unrest grows, every stalled engine signals a regime struggling to keep control. What happens next matters everywhere.